If you were born in America in 1939, your first breath already came with a price. Not a price written on your crib, not a price spoken by your mother. A racial price. White child, black child, same country, same flag, same year. Two completely different Americas. One entered a world built to protect it. The other entered a world built to contain it. And that difference did not begin in school. It did not begin at work. It did not begin with voting. It began the moment you were born. I know that because I watched it. I was born in 1939. I am 87 years old now, and I have spent a lifetime watching two babies enter the same nation and leave the hospital headed toward two very different futures. That is the thing people still struggle to understand. This was not just poverty, not just bad luck, not just a few cruel people making ugly choices. This was design, policy, custom, habit, fear. A whole country arranged so that white life and black life could begin on the same morning and still move in opposite directions before sunset. So let's start at the beginning, the delivery room. If you were born white in 1939 or 1940, your mother usually went to the main hospital, the clean one, the newer one, the one with enough nurses on the floor and enough sheets in the closet, and enough people who believed your life was worth preserving. Maybe she got her own room, maybe she shared with one other woman. Either way, someone checked on her. Someone answered when she called. Someone acted like the arrival of that child mattered. But if you were born black, the first question was not how healthy your mother was. The first question was whether they would even admit her properly. In much of the South, there were no equal hospitals. There were white hospitals, and then there were the rooms black patients were pushed into. Basements, back wings, overflow halls. The oldest section of the building, the part no one was in a hurry to repair, because no one important was expected to see it. I knew a woman named Lottie. She gave birth in 1941. The colored ward was full, so they put her in a hallway. A hallway. Not a room, not privacy, not dignity. A hallway. She delivered her baby on a rolling gurney, while orderlies pushed carts past her, and strangers kept walking as if pain itself were part of the architecture. And when people tell history too softly, they make this sound like inconvenience. It was not inconvenience. It was value being assigned in real time. The equipment in black wards was older. The staff was thinner. The doctors were fewer. One physician covering too many patients. One nurse moving from bed to bed too fast to notice who was slipping. Sometimes 5 or 6 black women labored in the same room at once, sometimes more. Separated by curtains if they were lucky, separated by nothing if they were not. And then the child came into the world, carrying the consequences of all of that. In 1940 America, a black baby was about twice as likely to die before the first birthday as a white baby. Twice as likely. Not because black mothers loved less. Not because black babies were weaker. Not because tragedy had somehow chosen one race over another. Because the system had. Because one life was resourced and the other was rationed. That is how the divide began. Not with opinion, with infrastructure, with access, with the quiet administrative decision that one set of children would be given more of a chance to live. And if you survived that first year, the gap did not close. It widened. Because now your parents had to find you a place to sleep. And in 1940 America, where you slept determined almost everything that came after. If you were white, your family could usually chase opportunity. Maybe not anywhere, maybe not without limits, but wherever money and work could take you, the country was built to meet you halfway. loans, subdivisions, neighborhoods protected for your comfort. Property sold with the assumption that your children deserved clean streets, safer blocks, better schools. But if you were black, the map itself had instructions about where your life was allowed to happen. Red lines. Actual red lines. Drawn around neighborhoods so banks could deny mortgages and call it policy. So agents could steer families away and call it business. So entire communities could be underfunded, overcrowded, and then blamed for looking exactly the way power had forced them to look. I watched a family in St. Louis in the mid-1940s save for years. The Turners. Good people. Careful people. The kind who counted every dollar twice before spending it once. They bought a house just outside the boundary everyone said they were supposed to respect. And for 3 nights after they moved in, men gathered outside, yelling, throwing glass, beating on the walls. By the 4th night, the police had arrived, not to protect them, to watch. That is how America worked. Not always with a law in your face, sometimes with a crowd, sometimes with a mortgage denial, sometimes with a uniformed man standing nearby doing nothing while your future was being driven back across town. So one child grew up in a house building equity. The other grew up in a neighborhood building someone else's wealth through rent. One inherited value, the other inherited restriction. And all of this happened before school, before first love, before the first job application, before the first ballot. That is what I need you to see. These were not separate injustices. They were one long river, and it started at birth. Day 1. First cry, first room, first address. And already, white and black America were being taught to live under different skies. Now you're old enough to remember things. Old enough to notice patterns, even if no one explains them to you. You're 5, maybe 6 years old, and the world has already decided where you belong. Because in 1940 America, childhood is not just about toys and laughter. It's about location. It's about lines. Invisible lines, drawn across entire cities. And everyone knows where they are. If you were born white, your parents could choose. Not unlimited choice, but real choice. A neighborhood with trees, sidewalks that don't crack under your feet, houses that belong to the people living inside them. Because banks would lend to your family, the government would back those loans. Low interest, long terms, a chance to own something that grows in value while you sleep. So every payment your parents made was not just survival, it was investment. It was a future being built quietly, brick by brick. But if you were born black, choice looked different. Because your parents weren't just choosing a home, they were navigating a map that had already rejected them. Red lines, drawn deliberately. Entire neighborhoods marked as too risky, not because of crime, not because of the buildings, but because of who lived there. So banks didn't lend. Not to your father, not to your mother, not even if they had steady work, not even if they had savings. The answer was already written. No. And when a system tells you no long enough, it stops feeling like rejection. It starts to feel like reality. So your family rents, month after month, year after year, paying money that disappears, building nothing that lasts. No equity, no ownership, no inheritance to pass down. Just receipts, and the slow understanding that stability is always temporary. I remember a family, the Turners. They did everything right. Saved for years, counted every dollar, planned every step. They bought a home just beyond where they were supposed to live. And for a moment, it looked like it might work. 3 days. That's how long it lasted. By the third night, the crowd came. Not one or two people, dozens, then more. Voices rising, objects thrown, warnings delivered without needing explanation. And the police? They were there, standing, watching, allowing. The Turners left before the week ended, not because they wanted to, because they understood the message. This is not your place. That's how housing worked. Not just contracts and signatures, but pressure, fear, and the quiet cooperation of people who could have stopped it, but didn't. So while white families were buying homes, watching their property value rise, black families were being pushed back, again and again and again. And here's the part most people miss. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about wealth. Because when you own a home, you build something. Something that can be sold. Something that can be borrowed against. Something that can be passed to your children. But when you rent, you survive. And survival doesn't compound. So one child grows up in a house that gains value over time, and another grows up in a place that never belongs to them. One inherits stability. The other inherits limitation. And children notice. Even when no one explains it. You notice which streets feel safer, which homes look stronger, which neighborhoods get repaired, and which ones get ignored. You notice who owns and who waits. And without anyone saying it out loud, you begin to understand your position, your place. That's the second difference. Not just where you're born, but where you're allowed to live. Because in 1940 America, your address was not just a location. It was a prediction. A prediction of your school, your safety, your opportunities, your future. And once those lines were drawn, they were very hard to cross. Almost impossible without paying a price. And the next place you feel that price is where every child is sent to learn who they're supposed to become. School. School. The place where a child is supposed to discover what they can become. But in 1940 America, school didn't just teach you skills. It taught you your value. If you were born white, you walked into a building that felt permanent. Brick walls, clean windows, desks lined up in neat rows. Books that still held their covers, pages that hadn't been torn out by time. Your teacher had a college education, maybe more. They had time to notice if you struggled, time to encourage you if you showed promise. There was a library, a place filled with ideas, a place that quietly told you, you are expected to learn. Maybe there was a gym, maybe even a science room. Places designed not just to teach you facts, but to expand what you believed was possible. And if you were doing well, someone might say it out loud. You could go far. Now, if you were born black, school felt different before you even stepped inside. Because the building itself told a story. Wood instead of brick. Cracks instead of paint. Roofs that leaked when it rained. Buckets placed on the floor, not as accidents, but as routine. In winter, you kept your coat on. Not because you forgot to take it off, because there was no heat. In summer, the air didn't move. No fans, no relief. Just rows of children trying to focus while sweat ran down their backs. And then there were the desks. Not enough. Some children sat two to a seat. Some sat on the floor. And the books, if you could call them that, old, worn, pages missing, covers gone. These were not new materials. They were leftovers. passed down from white schools when they were no longer wanted. You learned history from books already outdated. You learned science from pages already falling apart. And still, you were expected to keep up. I remember classrooms with nearly 40 students, sometimes more, and one teacher trying to hold it all together. One teacher teaching multiple grades at once, switching between lessons, trying to give each child something, anything, that might help them move forward. And that teacher, often doing the best they could, with far less than they deserved. Because the system didn't invest in them either. This wasn't about ability, it was about allocation. In states across the South, far more money was spent on each white student than on each black student. Same country, same taxes, different investment. So one child sat in a classroom designed to prepare them for opportunity, and another sat in a classroom designed to maintain limitation. And then later, people would look at the outcomes and pretend not to understand the cause. They would ask why one group performed better, why one group advanced faster, as if the race had started from the same line. But it hadn't. It never had. Because education is not just information. It's environment. It's expectation. It's the quiet message repeated day after day. This world is open to you. Or, this is as far as you go. And children hear that message even when no one says it out loud. They absorb it through broken desks, through missing pages, through the way the system shows up, or doesn't. So one child begins to imagine a future without limits, and another learns to navigate a world already limiting them. That's the third difference. Not just what you learn, but what the world expects you to become. And as you grow older, those expectations don't fade. They follow you. Into your teenage years, into the moment you begin to choose who you are allowed to love. By the time you're a teenager, you start to feel something new. Not just rules, but boundaries around your own heart. Because growing up means noticing people. The way someone looks at you, the way you look back. The quiet beginning of something human. If you were born white in 1940, that feeling was yours to explore. Maybe your parents had opinions. Maybe society had expectations. But legally, you were free. Free to date. Free to fall in love. Free to imagine a future with whoever you chose. But if you were born black, love came with rules. Not social rules, legal ones. Actual laws, written down, enforced, punished. In much of America, especially across the South, it was illegal for a black person and a white person to marry. Not discouraged, not frowned upon. Illegal. And not the kind of law you could ignore. The kind that could follow you home. The kind that could put you in a cell. There were couples who tried anyway. Of course there were. Because the heart doesn't follow policy. I remember a couple, Evelyn and Thomas. She was black, he was white. They met quietly, talked carefully, lived in the kind of space where every glance had to be measured. Because being seen was dangerous. Not just embarrassing, not just scandalous. Dangerous. They wanted something simple, a life together. But simple things were not simple for them. So they left, drove across state lines, found a place where the law would allow what their own state would not. They got married, came back home, and home rejected them, because the paper they carried meant nothing there. The law where they lived still said, this is not allowed. And when the law says your love is invalid, it doesn't just affect your marriage, it affects your safety, your home, your future. There were cases, where people were arrested in their own houses, charged not for violence, not for theft, but for loving the wrong person. That's what segregation did. It didn't just separate schools. It didn't just divide neighborhoods. It reached into the most personal part of your life and controlled that too. So if you were white, love was possibility. If you were black, love was calculation, risk, consequence. You had to think about where you stood, who was watching, what could happen if someone decided you crossed a line you didn't even draw. And the danger wasn't equal, because history made one thing very clear. Accusations did not need proof. All it took was someone deciding you didn't belong in that moment, and everything could change. So you learned early what not to look at, what not to say, what not to feel, at least not out loud. And imagine what that does to a young person. Learning to edit your own emotions before you even understand them. Learning that something as natural as love can cost you everything. That's the fourth difference. Not just who you could be, but who you were allowed to love. And as you step into adulthood, those limits don't disappear. They follow you into the place where survival becomes responsibility. Work. Adulthood arrives quietly. No announcement, no warning. Just expectation. You are grown now. Time to work. Time to build something. Time to survive on your own. If you were born white in 1940, this is where doors begin to open. The war ends. The economy expands. Factories hire. Offices grow. Unions protect wages. And if you served, there was something called the GI Bill. Education, training, loans. A ladder placed directly in front of you. All you had to do was climb. But if you were born black, that same ladder looked different. Not removed, but out of reach. Because on paper, many of those opportunities existed for you too. On paper. But in practice, doors don't have to be locked to stay closed. Sometimes they just don't open. You apply for a job. You dress well. You speak clearly. You bring everything they asked for. And still, something shifts the moment they see you. A pause. A glance. A decision made without words. We'll let you know. And you never hear back. Or worse, you do hear back, but not for the job you applied for. I remember a man, Robert Lee Carter, early 1960s. He walked into a textile mill, strong, educated, ready to work. They looked at him, looked at his application, and said, "We don't hire colored for that position." But they had something else. Cleaning, maintenance, the bottom. That was the ceiling. So while white workers stepped into jobs with protection, with benefits, with a path forward, black workers were pushed into roles with none of that. Lowest pay, hardest labor, least security. And no matter how well you did, no clear way up. Even unions, the very institutions built to protect workers, often excluded black workers entirely. So the jobs that built the American middle class were not built for everyone. And then there's something harder to talk about, because it wasn't just men. Black women worked in a different kind of silence. They cleaned homes they would never own, cooked meals they could not afford, raised children that were not their own. I watched it. My own mother, working week after week, taking care of another family's life, while hours waited for what was left of her time. She was paid just enough to survive, never enough to rise. And this is the part people misunderstand. This wasn't just about income. It was about accumulation. Because if your job gives you stability, benefits, room to grow, your life expands. But if your job keeps you just above survival, your future stays small. So one group builds careers, the other builds endurance. One plans ahead, the other reacts. And over time, that difference compounds, year after year, generation after generation. So when people look back and ask, why didn't everyone succeed the same way? They're asking the wrong question. Because the opportunity was never the same. That's the fifth difference. Not just whether you could work, but whether your work could build a future. And even after all that, even after surviving childhood, school, love, work, there was still one thing left. The power to shape your own country, or be shut out of it completely. Voting.